Cops arresting other cops. What's the scoop behind your badge-on-badge bust? Probationary officer goes on a blind double date with his roommate. Been at the racetrack drinking, so they take the train downtown. Everyone is pretty drunk, him in particular. Maybe to entertain or show off for his date, he is acting goofy. As everyone is getting off the train, he sees some guy bent over tying his shoe. Rocket scientist decides to leapfrog over the guy, only neither of them has much balance. Probationary cop basically jumps over on the guy and drives his face straight into the pavement because he is too drunk and the guy wasn't expecting it. Everyone jumps up and he starts trying to defuse the situation he just caused. Turns out the guy is a 17-year-old kid heading down to spend the weekend with his grandparents and has 2 broken teeth and a broken nose. The drunk cop starts saying stuff like, "It's okay, it will be fine, I'm a cop, it's all good." When he realizes the crowd isn't going to let him just walk away, he footbails and tries to run off. A few guys chase him down and grab him. Cops get called and detain him. I was the on-call detective who was called out at 22:30 to handle the case. He refused to answer any questions and was booked in for felony battery, based on the extent of injuries and the age of the victim. He never made it off probation and resigned. Talk about a night going from bad to straight-up disaster. What got me is the "I'm a cop, it's all good" line. Dude really thought he could just run off and that be the end of it? That's one way to end your law enforcement career before it even really starts. Good on the department for not trying to brush it under the rug and actually following through with the charges. My dad was still working as a full-time cop before switching full-time to firefighting and made a traffic stop around 11 at night back in the mid-80s. Nicer car, speeding well over the speed limit, so my dad initiates a stop. Before he is out of his cruiser, the driver has what looks like a badge hanging out of the window. My dad walks up, does the usual song and dance, and the driver said, "You obviously can't freaking see who I am." My dad says, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel, I do, and right now I'm conducting a traffic stop." Turns out the driver was a lieutenant colonel in the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which is pretty high up in their rank structure. My dad again asks him for a license and insurance, and the guy goes off, threatening to call Dong, as in Dong Celeste, who was governor at the time, and threatening his job, that he was just trying to get back to Columbus after an engagement, and so on. Eventually, he calls for backup and has another officer there to witness what was going on. Eventually, my dad writes him a ticket, and while still screaming, Mr. Pulling Rank drives away. The next shift, my dad gets called in by his assistant chief and is asked about the stop, and apparently the colonel of OSHIP was calling him about it. In the end, they had to bring in the other officer to write a statement of what went on, and in the end, nothing came of it except the ticket wasn't contested and paid. This story's got me shaking my head big time. The "I'm gonna call the governor" kind of tantrum is some next level entitlement right there. OP's dad is absolute legend for not letting Mr. High and Mighty Highway Patrol get away with it though. Kudos for him for sticking to his guns and making sure that ticket stuck like glue. Ex-sheriff's deputy here. One night on shift, I had the great misfortune to overhear on the radio that a small local chief of police, the whole department was only 3 people, was not answering a radio call. So my shift partner goes out to the call that they were trying to get him to go to. And I make my way to try and locate this chief of police. On my way to the police station thinking maybe he's just asleep on the couch, I see a squad car pulled off onto the side of the road with the lights on. In that moment, my heart sank. My first thought was, oh no, this dude just got killed on a traffic stop. As I'm walking up to the car in a hurry, I noticed that he slumped over. I reached into the open driver's window and grabbed his shoulder to try and put my fingers against his neck to feel if he has a pulse or if his skin is still warm, and generally check to see if he is in fact still alive. As I'm doing this, I notice a distinct and strong odor of alcohol. As the chief of police wakes up, looks at me, puts the car in drive, and pulls away. About that time, another deputy pulls up behind my car, and I put out on my radio that the chief is driving off. The other deputy, forgetting that we all use a shared frequency, then comes over the radio and says he should be easy to follow, his lights are on. The lights go off. Fast forward to several hours later, command staff is out at the police department seizing the weapons and evidence that are stored within the department. This chief of police shows up with the mayor of the small town and submits himself to a breathalyzer. He barely passes. Fun fact, district attorneys do not like prosecuting chiefs of police, especially when politics are starting to get involved. Unrelated to that, I was let go about 2 weeks later for calling a suspect a butthole. Unprofessional conduct. The image of stumbling upon the chief like that, thinking the worst, only find out that he's just passed out drunk is something straight out of a sitcom. You just can't help but shake your head and laugh at the absurdity of it all. But the twist at the end, getting fired over calling a suspect a butthole, seems like a pretty mild thing considering the whole chief of police fiasco. I actually have had to arrest 3 separate members of the justice system this year. First, a practicing lawyer and a former judge who had been utilizing his position to coerce defendants into engaging in intimate acts. He utilized this leverage even after he was not a judge anymore. Investigation by DCI revealed he had about a dozen victims, so a warrant for his arrest was made, which I executed. Arresting a guy you used to put defendants in front of is a very odd feeling. He weaseled out of prison time, got it all suspended, and put on a direct supervision probation program. Absolute horse crap. I've seen guys do way less get way more time. But it's not really a secret that money has a habit of tipping the scales of justice. Next was a prison guard who strangled his girlfriend, then stalked her relentlessly. I actually arrested him twice because after he posted bail on the first one, he was spotted lurking outside her home only 45 minutes after being released. He's currently in on felony assault, strangulation of a household member, and felony violation of a protection order. He's still in my jail awaiting trial with a bail that has been substantially increased. I'm anticipating prison time for him, but only time will tell. Third was a city police officer. I'm a county deputy sheriff because we received a call from a 6-year-old that his dad was in the garage doing drugs and wouldn't come out. Showed up to find 4 very young kids running around unsupervised. It was a city police officer using drugs that he had confiscated during a traffic stop and had not reported or turned in to evidence. DCI took the case from us due to a potential conflict of interest and placed him in another county's jail, and I haven't heard any more about it. Hope he does time too. What kind of a-hole leaves his little kids totally alone and unsupervised while they do drugs, especially when said person is a frickin' cop? Unforgivable in my opinion. But yeah, 2020 has been a very strange year for me. My dad was the arresting officer of an undercover narcotics detective for the murder of 2 fellow officers. From what I remember, the 2 officers and a technician caught him by surprise while he was stealing from an evidence room. He shot the 2 officers first and his firearm jammed. So the technician escaped, the detective got life in prison and died there. I'm from Brazil and I am not a police officer, but my grandfather was. He was a colonel of the military brigade, Coronel da Polícia Militar in Portuguese. We're from north of Brazil. And in the 1960s, in my state's countryside, conflict with Native American people was very common. My grandfather told me that the titular officer for the city was capturing Timbra people protesting for their land and torturing them. I remember he specifically said something about kicking tied up people in their backs until they bled, putting salt on the wounds, and stepping on them with military boots. That detail stuck with me. The thing is, my grandfather's grandmother came from this aldeia, I don't know the right term in English. The same ethnicity, same city, so he had more of a sympathetic vision of the Native American people, more than the typical Brazilian police officer from the 60s. He saw what the police force was doing in that city, and when he got called for supervising the conflict, he arrested the guy because he was doing that to men, women, and children. The guy was demoted, some other guy came with the same approach, and absolutely nothing changed. That's what my grandfather told me. This was during my time as a United States Marine Corps military police. Never arrested another police officer during my other engagements. Got a phone call from the guy's wife saying he was drunk and refusing to leave the house. Knocked on the front door but found him crying on the porch about his wife leaving him because she wasn't happy anymore. She walked by the porch and motioned for me to come inside through the glass door. She proceeded to show me the red marks on her throat, the hole in the door that he punched through beside her head, and some other evidence that does not need to be disclosed. After asking him to come inside and get dressed, he refused to leave with me. I wasn't going to handcuff him in front of his kid, but he decided to take that moment to run from me. He was faster and got away for about 5 minutes before I found him walking through a playground a couple of buildings over. Caught up to him, he punched me, but was taken into custody after a slight use of force. On the way to the station, he tried to kick out a window in my cruiser and told me I was ruining his life. He ended up getting charged with about 7 different charges and was kicked out of the Marines. On his way out, he lied to the Naval Criminal Investigation Service and accused me of assault, triggering an investigation. He falsely made allegations by claiming he heard I had assaulted someone at the Marine Corps ball. Due to a law passed in, if I recall correctly, 2013, all military sexual assault allegations have to be investigated by a Title 18 law enforcement agency. NCIS was the one that took the case. The investigation was completed thoroughly and all charges against me were marked as unsubstantiated, but the charges still showed up after I got out and went through a background check for my security clearance. 10 out of 10 would do again. My slight inconvenience was totally worth it for him to go down for domestic assault charges. My uncle arrested an officer from another city for drunk driving, claiming to be the head of that city's police department. Head of the offending officer is my other uncle, first uncle's brother, who was actually sitting in my uncle's patrol car before the off-duty police officer was tagged. Can't go into much detail, but had to book an officer in for taking his female roommate's phone and sending her nudes to his own phone. He then threatened to leak them unless she did sexual favors for him, but she called it in instead. Saw a true crime video where this police officer killed his ex-wife because she was trying to divorce him and had a really nice life insurance. He was struggling hella hard with bills, and apparently the crime split the whole police department up. People who thought he was guilty versus people who couldn't believe it and thought he wasn't guilty. In the end, he was caught because he was the only one who had the keys to the car she drove, and the police found a paper with calculations on it that were how much he would have left over after the life insurance money paid off his debt and his house. Oh, and he was sleeping around with a coworker. LOL. I have arrested 12 police officers for driving under the influence, 2 of whom faced charges of possessing weapons while intoxicated. I've arrested 1 police officer for writing a check on a closed account, and another for violating a protection order during a very ugly divorce. I assisted the federal authorities in a couple of tax-related arrests. I've also arrested a total of 3 police officers for dereliction of duty. One of those officers failed to arrest or conduct a DUI investigation after a crash involving another officer. All those cases proceeded in a similar fashion as other people with similar backgrounds and criminal records would have with similar offenses. The slap on the wrist is actually very common and the norm for first-time offenders. The things I have found police officers arrested for are generally the same things other middle-class, blue-collar workers get in trouble for. Issues with substance abuse, particularly alcohol, and financial problems. My career is perfectly fine. I've faced absolutely no negative repercussions from any of my peers. I would say if you work for a large enough agency, you have probably arrested or written a ticket to a police officer. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, reactions, and of course your own wild stories in the comments, and here's another video YouTube thinks you'll love.